YouTube, warbles on a lot here. Sunday the 8th of November, just getting ready to record The Outsiders, and the first Moondog should be a separate broadcast.
Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy and you're not.
Late to it this morning, but there's been so much to talk about. And your Outsiders this morning are Gail Morgan, an associate partner at Newgate Communications. She's been an advisor to Simon Crean and Kim Carr. Sarah Martin with you too, political reporter for The Australian, and Tony Wilson, freelance journalist, broadcaster, author of the new and presumably celebrated children's book, Emo the Emu. He's also behind the speeches site Speakola. You'll find that at speakola.com. Welcome all. Welcome all.
Hi.
What a week! What a week! And the Prime Minister was out there front and centre, giving us vision, giving us words of inspiration, giving us elaborate metaphors.
So reform, since that is the topic of your conference, should not be seen as a once-in-a-decade or two convulsion accompanied by a hyperbolic scare campaign. Rather, it should be seen as a change of political culture that sees us, like the sailor surrounded by the uncertainty of the sea and the wind, who knows only two things for sure: where she needs to go and that she has the skill to get there. Sometimes the sailor reaches the mark with rapid ease, her sails big-bellied in a following wind. Sometimes with slow and deliberate tenacity, sails close haul, tacking into the teeth of a gale. But her vision is as clear as her destination is certain. How to get there and how quickly is the measure of her skill.
I feel better already, Tony Wilson.
Well, what a speech, Jonathan. It feels as though we have lacked the poetry in speech making in the Abbott years, and Malcolm Turnbull threw us back into it with
it's
A.A. Milne-like.
Sarah Martin, we have come a long way from three-word slogans to elaborate nautical metaphors.
Well, in fact, I think there was a four-syllable word in there. So, but I'm not sure if the yachting metaphors are really going to help Malcolm Turnbull convince voters that he's got the common touch. But yes, it's certainly a change of style.
And Gail, is this helping us? I mean, look, I guess in entering into this discussion, which is fundamentally about tax, we want to enliven it somewhat. We want to have a sense of where we're going. Gail, is that sort of suiting that objective, do you think?
I think it is part of his style. I think he is showing that he's trying to have a conversation with people, and ultimately to be successful in getting through tax reform, he's going to have to do it.
And this is the thing. I mean, this is what we're talking about. And Tony, if we look at the papers today, where quickly this is coming down for what you'll pay under a new GST kind of debate in the press. And I'm wondering if that's really the sort of conversation we need to have here. Is it that particular, or should we be more open-minded about it?
Well, it's such a big topic that really anything can be thrown in at any moment to provide, a different political slant on it. So, I mean, Malcolm Turnbull seems to have been quite clear about this sort of higher GST and lower income taxes have kind of been his message over the 10 years, and simplification of the system. So, I mean, I think he also 10 years ago was talking about trying to eliminate all the myriad deductions that people claim and to sort of make it a simpler process. But the attack is going to come on what is the fairness of this. He used the words himself. Fairness is absolutely critical. And fair is obviously in the eye of the beholder, and he is going to find that out.
See, I reckon, Gail, that we underestimate this fairness thing. We take a bit of a mamby-pamby view that we're just trying to be nice to everybody. And this has been one of the key economic conversations of the past 12 months. It is showing how equity is actually a driver of economic growth. Fairness is a really important economic concept.
Absolutely. I mean, if people are paying more tax, then they can, more of their share of the burden of tax, then they will spend less, and it has a whole bunch of other consequences for the economy. And I think, there are lots of people that will look at every measure, and you can run a pretty amazing oppositionist campaign around, political campaign around fairness. So getting that balance right is going to be critical.
How's the politics of this going to shake out, Sarah? I mean, there's a bit of positioning going on. The government saying everything's on the table. Opposition's been a bit cautious, and they're trying to sort of give the impression that they're there for the conversation and not just there to attack. I mean, do you think it's going to last?
Look, I mean, I think already we've seen Labor come out reasonably strongly saying that they're not going to support a regressive tax system that unfairly burdens the most vulnerable in society. Obviously, they would be quite happy to fight an election on increasing the GST, but this question of fairness, I think, is a much more complex one. It's sort of rather than just the winners and losers in changing the tax system, because, you know, as someone who's not eligible for a raft of family payments, is that fair on me that I work hard and pay my tax and don't get anything back to effectively, you know, give the government money that's given to people who do choose to have children and so on.
Well,
so
and that's Turnbull's point too, about it being in the eye of the beholder, depending on where you stand in the economy and in the workplace and vis-a-vis family relationships or whatever else. I mean, fairness.
And a lot of people are receiving more in benefits than they pay in tax.
Yep.
So is that fair? And I think the problem is as soon as you start making changes, you're going to have this argument. You know, you get to hear the people screaming quite loudly who are going to be worse off. That doesn't necessarily mean it's unfair. It might just mean that it's changing and they're worse off.
And somebody has to be disadvantaged. Tony, will that be you?
I have myriad kids, so I probably will be there with my hand out. But there is a sense, I think, the missing group, the GST and the most vulnerable are slapped quickly in the discussion. And yet the missing group, I think, and there's been a sense with this with the Abbott government as well, and the infamous budget of 16 months ago. The missing group is what about all those superannuation benefits that grew up in the early 2000s, and where are the super rich? Why aren't they getting a special mention at this point?
I mean, that's the truth of this, that there is much we could do in tax and there is much you could put on the table. But Gail Morgan, I mean, there was a really interesting piece that Lenore Taylor wrote in the Guardian a day or so ago that kind of wonder whether we have this conversation. I was about to say ask about, but maybe it's too early for that kind of language on a Sunday morning, but maybe we do. You know, should we first define what it is that we want our tax system to deliver before we start quibbling over the nature of those taxes themselves? Is that, Gail, a better way to frame the conversation?
I think that is a better way to frame the conversation, but it's also, I think you've got to talk to people about why tax reform's needed. I think lots of people will still sit back and say, yes, it's complex. I pay a bit here in GST, but I don't really see it. I pay some here in income tax, which I do see. So I think there's two parts of that conversation that still need to be had before Australians are seriously going to back any tax reform changes that are put on the table.
There's a media responsibility here too, isn't there, Sarah Martin, that you know, the media has to take this conversation seriously as well and not go for sort of gotcha moments, not try and trap people into revelations and disclosures, to have the serious conversation there as well.
Well, look, yeah, and I guess that there has been a concerted effort from Malcolm Turnbull to say he's not playing this rule in, rule out game. That you know, the media does often ask politicians to be fairly equivocal in supporting or ruling things out. So I think that's part of it. But you know, already just going back to sort of what Gail was saying is that we don't really know what problem they're trying to solve at the moment. We've got a bunch of people saying that, you know, is it the deficit we're trying to fix? Is it the funding to states for health and education? Is it income tax? Is it bracket creep? You know, there's a range of issues that I think we need to know what the problem is before the government can really sell the solution. So, and of course, the media is going to be speaking to people who have their own ideas about where any increased revenue should go, and you know, inevitably you'll speak to the people who claim that they'll be worse off, better off, you know, under any particular change. So yes, I think the media will play a part.
Well, it's interesting, Sarah, just to stay with you there too, because on that question of honesty, I mean, and what the money is for, we know that the feds are pulling a lot of money out of the states, and that takes place in about 18 months' time. And that's part of the problem we could be addressing, but that's sort of inhibited by the fact that the federal government doesn't even admit that they're doing that. You know, there's this sort of concealment of the extent of the funding problem into basic services in states.
And look, you are going to have, and particularly it's going to be interesting to see how the Labor premiers handle this, because on one hand, they're going to be wanting to have a political argument about not wanting to increase the GST, but at the same time, they're going to be eyeing off that extra bucket of money fairly lovingly, I would suggest. So how are they going to, you know, they want it, but they don't want the means to the end. So I think that's going to be interesting politics to watch too.
Well, and Tony Wilson, we can express that in terms of avarice on part of the states, but it's also necessity.
Absolutely. I mean, it does feel as though traditional states areas like health and education, the biggest spending areas of our government have been neglected. And I think if Turnbull could do a good deal with premiers in which specific hospitals are laid out for improvement and a Gonski-like education plan is laid out, you could have a situation where it seems more palatable because it will deliver a huge bucket of money, and if the voter thinks that he or she is getting a tangible advantage in the areas which are most important, then it may be sellable.
Maybe that's the way to have a tax conversation. Not talk about GST or corporate tax or whatever else, but start talking about schools and hospitals. That might cut through better. 5 to 10. Outsiders here on Sunday Extra, Gail Morgan, Sarah Martin and Tony Wilson. I want to play you something now, something of a change of gear, but if you could all be upstanding. And this is something you didn't hear this week at the Melbourne Cup.
Australians, oh let us rejoice, for we are young and free, with gold and soil and wealth fertile, our home is
It's probably wrong to fade the national anthem. Jessica Malboy singing Advanced Australia Fair. We had to cut her out before she got to the troublesome second verse. I think we can say that. Melbourne Cup, this past Tuesday, Jessica was scheduled to sing the national anthem. Didn't do it. A panic attack has been blamed, brought on by an argument in the dressing room over whether she was wearing shoes that were sold by the sponsor of the event. Tony Wilson, has the world gone mad?
Oh, the world went mad officially in 1953. That was the turning point. No, it's been mad for a long time, but this is one of the maddest. And I think it's an example of both the corporate domination of our cultural events, but also, I guess, star behaviour, because it sounds as though Jessica almost didn't cope with the fight as much as the fight being determined in a certain way.
I think that's the story of it. Excuse me. But Sarah, this is... Yes, you can have an argument of whether you actually need the national anthem before a horse race. I guess that's one thing. But this is the national anthem. Do we actually worry whether the singer of the national anthem is wearing the sponsor's shoes?
Well, clearly a lot of people did, and I feel very sad for Jessica Malboy because I think she's fabulous, and she was obviously, caught up in this obscene argument about her footwear, and I think it's probably, I wish she was sort of more of a prima donna and had insisted going out there in bare feet because she is a really down to earth, wonderful singer, and I think that would have been much more appropriate, and it is pretty disgraceful, and I think the sponsors should be ashamed of themselves.
It's true, isn't it, Gail? I mean, sponsors really shouldn't have their hands on our national symbols. That's just, maybe it's one of those moments where we should just stop ourselves and just have a little bit of a look.
Hopefully now people can have some reflection on it. I mean, it's a national race and our national anthem is played every year, and I think hopefully the Victorian racing industry and those sponsors involved will have a serious look at what's happened.
It's good to have some Australians in the Melbourne Cup, even if we just have to include them as the singers at the start.
If you actually, gave national anthems depending on the representation in the race to follow, you'd not be having the thing until 5 p.m. It was otherwise, Tony, a fairly remarkable event, as we now know, of course.
Well, that's right. I mean, I've been, as you mentioned in the intro, the Speak side, I've been collecting great speeches, and one was delivered by Michelle Payne on the day, and you know, it did feel like a defining moment in that sport, and she spoke very well, and 100-to-1 shots don't happen that often either.
Yes, a little bit of torn betting slips all over the country on Tuesday, but cause for celebration as well. Were you amazed, Sarah, and this is just a final point here, and the Michelle Payne victory caught so many people on social media flat-footed, people who were all ready to sort of lamb-based horse.
Okay, apparently there's no first moondog this week. Once again, censored, I guess. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.